Welcome back. It's the Electric Election Podcast, Part 2 here at Vaagen Timbers. We just got to say goodbye to Congresswoman Kathy McMorris-Rodgers, but now we get to get into the
nitty-gritty.
Well, yeah, the tables that we're sitting on and all of the solutions. We're here with Russ Vaagen of Vaagen Timbers. Benji, what's the first question you got?
Well, okay, so we're sitting in this beautiful area that you have such a stake in. Your family owns a lot of this land, and I actually just want to get into it right away. What is Vaagen Timbers, and why did you start it, and why should the average person care about it?
Yeah, well, it started with my family's company, who's right next door to us, that actually processes the trees into lumber. And then I've been traveling in Europe and seeing them use solid wood. So we've all seen the yodeling of the Swiss Alps and the wooden houses and that stuff. Well, they're just carpenters, right? Well, they've figured out how to create really substantial pieces of wood with small pieces. So you use adhesives and you put it together. And they started building these homes and these structures with cross-laminated timber. And so what we wanted to do is add more value to the products that are produced from these beautiful forests, and then give people an alternative on whether it's a single family home, a mountain lodge, or an 18-story mid-rise building to build with wood rather than just steel and concrete or the other materials we have. And we think when we manage the forests appropriately, that's the greatest way to use the resource, is to get out there, use it in a way that's sustainable, and it's beautiful. I mean, I heard somebody say once that you'll see people all the time go up and touch a wood beam or even hug a wood beam. Nobody touches or hugs a steel column. Well, you know? Just is what it is.
That's all then. No, in all honesty though, before we dive into the forest management portion, which I think is a really important portion to talk about, especially amidst the California wildfires right now, can you talk a little bit about cross-laminated timber, how it works, and then also the environmental benefits of cross-laminated timber as it pertains to the stereotypes that maybe people have of the timber industry being anti-environment?
Well, and almost to jump in right before, cross-laminated timber hasn't been around for very long in the United States, right? Maybe let everybody know just how new this is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was actually invented in Austria. I think it was in 1996. So it was mid-90s. And it didn't really get market acceptance until like the mid-2000s. So we haven't been doing it all that long at all globally. But in the United States, it's really just come on the last couple years. There's been 2 or 3 early entrants that tried to get the market going, and you know, trying to convince somebody to do something new is always difficult. And now we're starting to see more and more demand and more people get into it. You ask, what is cross-laminated timber, right? Cross-laminated timber, we've all seen plywood. So plywood is just taking thin layers of wood, gluing it together into a panel, and we use it for all types of things. Well, this is doing the same thing with lumber. So a 2x6 that we would use to frame a house, we now glue them together, cross-laminated layer, then glue them together the other way. So you get 2-dimensional strength, and you can get really long distances. So we make up to a 60-foot long panel. Our panels are 4 feet wide by 60 feet long. So it allows us to panelize things. And then when we use the really high-tech CNC for precision cutting, we can put them together like Legos. So I tell people, you know, when Legos first started, it was really just a bucket of pieces, right? And the really artistic and smart kids could make something really cool out of it. The rest of us kind of made some block stuff, and then we went on to something else. Well, then Lego realized that if they used their engineers ahead of time and made each piece specifically for where it's going, and then give a really simple set of instructions to follow, you too could make, you know, the Millennium Falcon or something cool. That's what we're doing with buildings. So instead of now taking all these piles of lumber and building materials and screws and steel and concrete, we're really taking advantage of technology, 3-dimensional modeling of buildings, taking into consideration the electrical, the plumbing, the wiring, all the stuff that you need to do to make a structure work. Instead of doing it on the job site, we're really thinking about it in terms of design and then putting that together. So they go together rapidly, they're higher quality, and they really perform well from an environmental standpoint when it comes to heating and cooling and the inside environment of the structure.
Less cost, right? Less concrete or anything else, and there's less environmental cost to it.
Yeah, well, the thing about the cost is everybody wants to chalk this up to material. So they go, okay, well, if I frame a wall with 2x4s, how is cross-laminated timber or a heavy timber piece, a wall, how does that make sense? Well, it makes sense because it's assembled rather than constructed. So we're doing a lot of the work in the factory, and it's really high precision, meticulous work. Yeah, and so when you do that, you're able to take a lot of that labor that would have otherwise been done in the rain, and you wouldn't be able to control your materials, and there's a tremendous amount of waste that goes on in a build site. We limit that to almost nothing. No sawdust on site. You bring it out there, it goes together right every time. When it comes to steel and concrete, in almost all cases, mass timber is more cost effective than doing it with steel and concrete. This is not a cheap product. This is a value proposition. So we're not going to be able to just make every track home development out there in mass timber. That's not what this material is all about. This is a high quality, high performing material that can drive the cost down of building something other than just the materials. And so it's a bigger picture than that. So at the end of the day, if you were to stack two buildings side by side, finished, and then prices, mass timber will many times be less. But that's not the whole point. The whole point here is using better materials, using our resources wisely, and putting them into the best value and best use possible.
When you talk about resources being used wisely, can you give an example or talk a little bit about how environmentally sustainable cross-laminated timber is?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing, people think that cutting trees are bad, and I get it. It's just an easy stigma to make, and we've done it. Well, we've kind of made our bed. Now we need to figure out how to get back out of it, right? Because what people don't realize is that we have forests that are in really sick shape. There's too many trees on the landscape. We need to cut trees to save the forest, and people have a hard time bending their mind around that concept. But we need to leave the best trees that are out there and take out the material that's actually putting it at risk, by risk of wildfire, disease, and insects. The other thing that we haven't really got into yet is that trees consume a tremendous amount of water. And I don't think it's ironic that we're having droughts in areas that are downstream from forests that haven't been managed for decades. Because each tree consumes like 400 gallons per day of water. Like, you start doing the math, that's a tremendous amount of water.
Did a lot change for you when these forest fires happened? Because it sounds like a big process was trying to convince people that you could use these old sick trees and make them into really reliable wood for buildings. But then the environmentalists were saying, no, you got to save that decaying tree. Now it seems these big fires have allowed people to kind of come and understand your perspective.
Yeah, not all forests are the same, right? I mean, not everybody's going to be on board with logging in the rainforest. We're not talking about that. We're talking about areas where near where people live. We've got roads. We've managed these areas before. We're talking about using the best available science and technology to do the best job possible to mimic what Mother Nature's doing and use the byproduct of that in products. We're not extracting. We're not going and mining out a precious metal. What we're actually doing is taking what nature's giving us to try to emulate what fire was doing naturally. But we can't just go and enter fire now. Because if we do that, we create a new unnatural condition because we have too much vegetation out there. Too many trees, too many dry trees that are now a tinder for a catastrophic wildfire. And so if we're able to utilize that and replace things that are extractive in nature, I think that's a benefit for everybody.
So climate change is the elephant in the room. People talk about it all the time. We're going around the country to look at ways to lower emissions through common sense practices. Most people have this wall up against the timber industry because they think that it's incredibly anti-environment. We had this fascinating conversation this morning about how not managing our forests contributes to climate change more than anything else. It's not as direct that climate change is affecting forest fires as it is that forest fires are contributing to climate change, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
How did we get that so backwards, and how can we fix that?
Well, I think people look at it and they go, fires are natural. They're a natural part of the environment, which is true. But not all fires are created equally. And we've created, through human intervention, a situation now where we've got a problem. And we've got to go out there and fix it.
And science agrees.
The forests, in many cases, have become a carbon source instead of the carbon sink that we all think that they are.
Right.
we need to get them back to being carbon sinks. You know, we need to get them back inside what we call their natural range of variability. A forest should be in a certain range naturally. Well, they're so far out of that, and we have the tools to go in and not only take that material out, but add value to it and create jobs and building materials. And that, I think, resonates with a lot of people. You know, the forests and the forest fires are something that nobody wants to see get burnt down or destroyed. And we start burning these forests at levels that we've never seen before. They're contributing incredible amounts of pollution. Now, climate change, I believe, is happening. I think that there's questions to the impact and where it's coming from. You know, I've always said, it's really simple to me. I'm a runner, so when I go out and run and a car passes me and I'm out in the middle of nowhere, I smell those fumes and you can just tell that that's not healthy for you. You know, if you park in a garage, you leave the garage door closed, you leave it running, you die. So that's toxic, right? So if we do too much of that to the environment, that's a bad thing. I think everybody kind of wraps their mind around that and just kind of moves on. The same is true for the environment with forests. Now, if we have too many wildfires and we fill the skies with carbon pollution and all the other chemicals that come from these wildfires, it's not healthy for any of us. And so when I think about climate change and I think about the political ramifications of talking about it, I think we need to just be more open and more diverse in our thinking when it comes to how do we come up with solutions. You know, you might have an idea, I might have an idea, we could both be wrong, but if we still move towards an area that is beneficial for all, which is limiting pollution, which is creating a healthier environment. If we do those things, creating better water flows, better environment for the wildlife, that's going to benefit everybody. And if it's also improving what is climate change caused by whether it's the transportation sector or the forest burning, I think that's a win. And we can figure out who's right and wrong later.
It sounds almost like you see that climate change is happening, you're admitting to the science, but then you're also worried that humans have a role. Like, we are catalytic in how our forests started to catch fire. For 30 years we didn't manage them correctly, and it created like a cataclysmic negative event for the climate, and now we have other people trying to point to that cataclysmic event and say, no, it's climate change. How do we try to bridge that gap and start getting people to have a real conversation that by managing our forests, we're actually protecting our climate, and then in fact, we're empowering a business owner like you. We don't need to go to socialism to do this. We actually just need to listen to some of the citizens.
Well, I think if you go look, there's some amazing things going on globally. I happen to be friends with the former mayor of Spokane, David Condon, and he put together a Sustainable Cities tour where we went to Copenhagen, Denmark, traveled to Växjö, Sweden, went to Samsø Island in Denmark, and they're doing some amazing things, you know, from waste to energy to utilizing their raw materials. In Växjö, Sweden, it's called the greenest city in Europe. They call their developments the modern timber buildings, modern timber cities. What they're doing is they're using their local resources, they're building affordable housing, they're working with companies like Skanska and IKEA, they're coming up with real creative solutions. But here's what's really interesting. Talking to these guys in Växjö about being the greenest city in Europe, they're talking about how much they've reduced their carbon footprint, but in the same breath, talking about how much they've increased revenue of their businesses. So humans are part of the solution. Yes, we've created problems, some of it unknowingly, but as we get more data, we change our behavior, and we can really make a positive impact. And many people are. I think it's so easy to just draw it up and be against something rather than going, okay, how do we influence and incentivize those that have really good solutions to do more of that, to help us even more than we are right now?
Well, and I think going off of Saul's question, it almost, in your answer, it's that you have to have this all-the-above approach to solutions, and that it can't all just come in the transportation sector, and it can't all just come, you know, via this one policy or via one government entity. It has to come from this partnership of coalitions that, you know, Kathy McMorris-Rogers and us talked about just briefly. Can you talk about kind of how you've seen that coalition work between you and a member of Congress, as well as the U.S. Forest Service and the local city here and the businesses that you guys work with, like Microsoft? I mean, you pretty much work with everyone, and you're solving environmental challenges and growing your business at the same time. So can you talk about the importance of that coalition building and maybe even highlight the A to Z project?
Teach us your ways. All of America needs to know.
I agree. I actually had the opportunity to do a TEDx talk on collaboration based on this whole thing. And we've developed some things with working with the environmental community on national level environmental groups like the Nature Conservancy, regional like Conservation Northwest, and working with Sustainable Northwest out of Portland, the Lands Council, Kettle Range Conservation Group, many others, right? And the first time we got together, people from the timber industry were like, those people are impossible to deal with, it's not gonna work. So it's really important for us to create an opportunity and a space that we could really talk and start creating trust, right? Build trust. Try to understand one another. Create a situation of abundance mentality instead of a scarcity mentality. Like somebody comes to the table and they want more wilderness, that doesn't mean less timber. It means how do we support all these things so timber can then support wilderness, right? How can motorized recreation have a series of trails in areas where it makes sense while supporting wilderness in the backcountry?
Well, I mean, take the A to Z project, right? Kathy McMorris Rogers was talking about how that was first done with you to kind of help Vaagen Timbers, but part two, you're going to be creating hiking trails out here. It takes so much energy and effort to cut a hiking trail, and yet Vaagen Timbers is going to be doing that while creating cross-laminated timber that's good for the environment.
And with partnership with the U.S. Forest Service, right?
Right. So before starting Vaagen Timbers, I was the vice president of Vaagen Brothers Lumber, my family company. That's where I spent most of the time trying to create this abundance of resource, because we have plenty of forests out here to do all of it. And I think once you do that and you start going through that collaborative process, you start to realize that this is going to work really well. And if people would just put down their swords, come to the table and talk about it. Let's not talk about lightning rod issues. Let's talk about our common ground, because we all have more in common than we have separate. And I think that people, especially in election years and in a hyper-politicized situation that we find ourselves in, people forget about that. Like I know people that will get together, really enjoying themselves, and then they find out that somebody has a different viewpoint and it ruins the interaction. We can't do that. It's got to be okay to disagree. I don't mind if somebody has different ideas of the way that the social construct works, or whether it's, their opinion is paramount because of the way that our Constitution works, right? So I value people and their opinions. I try to bring people together, and it's never about the individual, it's about the group. And we let that drive. We don't go into it saying, okay, this is what we're gonna harvest. Now, how do we put some bells and whistles on it so we can cut more trees and still be okay? What we do is we say, wait a second, what's best for the forest? Because ultimately, what's best for the forest is never to cut it down. Like, that's going to be where we end up, right?
So you burn the entire forest if you never cut any bit of it.
But if you go into it saying, you know what, I value that you are interested in wilderness. I don't think that is mutually exclusive with timber harvest and recreation. And we talked about the A to Z project. How do we get public-private partnerships? How do we get companies to work with the Forest Service, with the Department of Interior, with other entities to try to all do what they do best, and then create not only materials that go to the sawmill and then ultimately become mass timber, but how do we create things like recreational trails so people can enjoy being outside and being part of this wonderful environment. And then beyond that, wood products are incredible. They go to make paper. A lot of people say, oh, save a tree, don't use paper. Like, a lot of the materials that we use in North America come as a residual from a sawmill that is thinning the forest. So that's a different construct in how that material is created. And that's really, there's a different way of looking at it from a recycling standpoint. And we can create energy as well. We take woody biomass and burn it in a boiler. We use electrostatic precipitators to zap all of the particulates. So there's nothing in the smoke that comes out. We have now biochar as a soil supplement. We've got energy, and we've utilized all the material from the trees. It's a wonderful thing, and people just need to be a little bit more open-minded about it. And we can do incredible things, help revitalize rural communities that lost their sawmills years ago and really benefit urban environments that really need this new housing that we can make incredible.
We have about 4 minutes left here, so it's a bummer to kind of leave this conversation. We got to get to the next part of the United States to keep learning about how we can solve this. But I mean, a theme that I keep on hearing is whether you're on the right or left, like come down to Vaagen Timbers and maybe just learn a little bit about how a partnership can be built to really help the environment. I mean, it gets me so excited.
Yeah, and I actually just think one of the most fascinating parts about it is that we're here and you truly are working with all sectors of society to make this a better place, but I also, with better building materials and environmental results at the same time. But what's really cool about it to me is that you've done that as somebody who is in the timber industry, which is seen as like an anti-environmental industry, but you're in business to keep forests healthy. Yeah. Like that is a goal of of especially a company like yours, which is taking trees that are, struggling and diseased and too small or like too dry, and you're taking them and making environmentally sustainable products with them that are inexpensive and sturdy and reliable. I mean, what gets better than that?
We're from here. We love it here, and this is our home. So we want to take good care of it. We homesteaded here. We work with the Native American tribes that are around here, and we take the material that they harvest off their lands and help add value to it. I mean, this is a model where we can work together with everybody. We don't have to agree on every little detail. And I think about it, when I see Democrats or I see Republicans, I think about like families. Like we can have almost the same opinion of things as our parents, yet all we do is argue with them, right? Yeah. So it's okay, we can have differences of opinion, we can have completely different political viewpoints, but when it comes down to it, let's find good solutions for our natural environment and that benefit everybody. It just makes too much sense. We've got to keep doing that and do more of it.
How tall, the last question for me, how tall can a cross-laminated building get? Are we going to see like an 18-story cross-laminated timber skyscraper in Spokane?
I don't know about 18 stories in Spokane, but I know that there are some very tall buildings that are happening in the Seattle area soon. The code allows for 18 stories. Now, because of fire issues, you have to cover a lot of that up with drywall. But what I really see happening is that mid-rise area. So if you've ever been in like South Lake Union in Seattle, there's no real high rises there until you get closer to downtown. But there's really no good way to build from like a 6-story to a 12-story because it's not energy efficient. It isn't efficient to build something out of steel and concrete below like 20 stories is the number that I've heard. So if you take all those buildings that we need from 6 to 12 stories and we start looking at how we can infuse cross-laminated timber and glulam beams, you're going to see more and more of it. The other thing is that it's wood. People say, oh, it's going to burn, but it's massive wood. So it chars and actually protects itself. What's ironic is in some of these buildings, they use the wood to actually protect the steel connectors because steel will fail at one heat point where wood will char over time. And if you see buildings that burn, the last thing standing is the wood superstructure, right? And so when it's in massive form, it's going to be a wonderful thing. And if we just keep looking to Europe as an example and then apply our own sensibilities here in North America, we'll build some incredible things.
Common ground, global scale solutions right here in Colville, Washington.
Goodness gracious, I think we found an incredible stop here in Colville, Washington. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks, guys.
Russ Vaagen. This is it for the electric election road trip out here in Colville. We've got a lot more to go. We're going all around the United States, Benji, but
this is just the start.
I'm feeling pretty inspired already.
Yep, I'm feeling pretty inspired too. I think we could end here and we'd have already accomplished something great, but we've got about 98% to go.
All right, well with that, see you for the rest of the 98%. I'm Saul Spady, Benjamin Backer. We got Russ Vaagen and Vaagen Timbers. We'll see you on the other side of the electric election road trip.